Hi, more real Anthroposophy. The next book I want to talk about is Meditations on the Tarot. Now, it's important sort of to get a little background to this situation because it's very much a part of, what shall we say, the history of the Anthroposophical Society. And people should be cognizant of that story, I might say. It's a very important story there that has to be related to. Now, what happens here? Well, Valentin Tomberg is the writer of Meditations on the Tarot, and for a while he was an anthroposophist. He did not meet Rudolf Steiner, although he did correspond with Dornach, and eventually became supported in his move to Dornach and his activities there by Elizabeth Rita. Now, that occurred subsequent to Steiner's death. So Steiner dies, and then this young man from Russia shows up. And of course people disagreed about whether he could do what he was doing, because what he did was he was speaking out of his own personal research into the spirit. And he was castigated by some people. Frau Marie Steiner, for example, said he couldn't do it because he wasn't 42. Absolute law from Rudolf Steiner says you can't talk about these things till you're past 42, and he was in his 30s. I don't know what to make of quibbles like that, because it seems to me that you don't evaluate whether he's a certain age or whatever, you evaluate the work. And Valentin Tomberg produced a lot of work using the language that Rudolf Steiner developed, the intellectual soul language for representing spiritual scientific research, and he did his own research, and he presented it in a number of very profound and meaningful books. He added to what Steiner did. And I think one of the things that made him sort of difficult was not only was he a different kind of personality than Rudolf Steiner, what I've heard is that he was a bit more fiery. That Russian passion. And of course, he wasn't Rudolf Steiner. And he was in a world where everybody else wanted to have the cloth of Rudolf Steiner. They wanted to be the next thing. And of course, to have a guy who was actually seriously clairvoyant, doing spiritual scientific research, and writing absolutely brilliant material, starting around 1931, I think that made people unhappy. Now, I don't know if the details of this are exactly for sure, but it's an interesting story to contemplate, and if it's true, it has a number of different implications. At any rate, in 1938, and Prokofiev, by the way, has written some books in which he attacks Tomberg. Thinks he's related to the Jesuits because Tomberg joined the Catholic Church during World War II, or shortly thereafter or something. Anyway, so the way I've constructed it from the few resources I have is that in 1938, Tomberg was in Holland, or in that general area. And he was teaching to a small group of people, and he was given lectures on things like the 4 sacrifices of Christ and the return of Christ and the ethereal, and so on and so forth, which are really extraordinarily beautiful lectures using the anthroposophical way of framing things. Okay, so there he is, he's doing that thing. And apparently he had the gall to continue the class lessons. Now we know, if you're in the class, that the lessons stopped after lesson 19 or something of the first class, the Michael classes. Well, Tomberg apparently produced a Sophianic set of class lessons, that is a second class, and a Christos set of lessons, that is a third class. Well, this would no doubt deeply offend a whole lot of people, and I don't know whether they exist, whether the holders of Tomberg's literary estate or other people have kept them secret from the Anthroposophical Society for reasons that may be good, maybe they're holding them for a time when people will actually take this material seriously. There are people who think we need that. We need the lessons. We need the lessons that weren't given. But in any event, Tomberg was asked to leave the society, at which point he acquiesced. I mean, it's not a thing that you sort of say no to in an esoteric society. And at that point, he no longer was able to be in contact with the community of spirits that supported the society. Now, why is this? Has it become some fault of his? No, because there were no people prepared to hear. If you're teaching using Steiner's lexicon, built out of intellectual soul concepts for teaching spiritual science, there's not much point in giving that material to people that don't understand the basic premises from which Steiner worked. So it becomes impossible for Tomberg to continue to teach spiritual science at that point in his life. A number of different things happens, and I'm going to skip that part. He ends up in England. And while he's in England, and he retires in 1960, I think, and after working in the post office there for about 10 years. And he goes to whatever's the big library there in London. I can't remember the name of it. I always forget the name of it. And he spends 7 years writing this book, Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. Now, it's a book which I describe as the previous book by McCune that's in parallel with spiritual science, the spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner. It's alongside. It's something that contributes to the advancement of humanity. It's a stream that, if Dornoch was more inclusive, would not be excluded because it's not purely anthroposophical according to the judgments of the people who make these kinds of decisions. But nevertheless, it represents a spiritual stream in humanity that it's very, very important to be aware of. It's a beautiful book. Anybody that reads it is going to learn a great deal. They don't necessarily have to buy anything in it. And there's no way really to describe it, although I'm going to get into this one little part that's probably going to make people nuts. Because I want to transition from something in here to the next videos, which are going to be about the shadow, or the double, or the doppelganger. Now, Tomberg writes these things that are called letters, and there's 22 of them, and they represent the meditations on the major arcana of the Tarot, and the meditations last for about 30 pages, and you won't find any writing anywhere that's the same level as this. And it is, subtitle is A Journey into Christian Hermeticism, and one way to see it is that the Catholic mysteries, in the sense that there were true Catholic mysteries sponsored by Christ, are in this book. Letter 15 is called The Devil, and it's about evil. And in there, Tomberg talks about the double or the shadow, but he talks about it through three different concepts. He talks about the prosecutor, he talks about the tempter, and he talks about egregores. The prosecutor, of course, is the Ahrimanic double. The tempter is the Luciferic double. And egregores are the human double. And when I get into my stuff about the shadow, we're going to get into that more. Tomberg also wrote a book in which these same themes were discussed as an anthroposophist, called Inner Development, where he gives a lecture on these problems using the anthroposophical language. These are important books that I've just showed you, McCune and Tomberg. They're important because the Christ impulse lives in them. The Christ impulse does not just live in Rudolf Steiner or in members of the Anthroposophical Society. Thank you.